Welcome back to the Saw Shop, everybody. I'm the Tin Man, as you know. Today's video is based 100% on a question I got in an email from Benjamin Nowak. If you have a question, send me an email. Email's on my About page. I answer as many emails as I can. I'll either send you an email back, put it at the end of a video, so stay tuned until the end, because if you've asked a question, it may be the question of the day at the end of a video, or like today's video, I will do a whole video just on the question. Stay tuned. Today's question and video is 1 ring versus 2. What are the positives and negatives? And Benjamin sent a wicked drawing that I'm going to put in this video. What are the negatives to running 1 ring on a 2-ring piston? Stay tuned. That's the question of the day and the video of the day. Okay, so today's video, Benjamin Nowak sent me an email. I'll read some of it to you here, and I'll show you the drawing that he sent. Hey, Tin Man, how are things going in Canada? I have 2 topics that I'm afraid only an experienced builder like you can or is willing to help me with. I'll try, buddy. I only know what I know. You've said you're a visual guy, so I just made a quick sketch. I'll show you the sketch at the end of this. Long story short, the idea of using a single ring in a 2-ring piston won't get into my head. Fully understand the advantages, but doesn't this sacrifice a reasonable chunk of case pressure? Second topic is about a carb. I'm going to probably send him another email on that. We're going to keep this video just on 1 ring versus 2. Here's the picture that Benjamin sent me. Look at this and study it, because when I saw it, I was like, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I'm very open-minded when it comes to building, and that was very interesting, Benjamin. Thank you for sending that drawing and taking the time to draw it. I asked him if I could use it in the video, and he was like, 100%, please do. Here's the picture that he sent me. Okay, so looking at that picture, he shows the top ring only and no bottom ring. And he's showing the exhaust and then the transfers. And the question is, do the transfers leak around the missing ring and out the exhaust? And then when the piston's going down, because I only have a ring here and not on the bottom, do you lose case compression? Because the piston going down is what causes case compression. Well, I still have the handy dandy chainsaw cutaway here. Let's dig deeper into this. I never thought of this before. The question is, do you lose some case compression out the exhaust? Let's dig into it. I'll tell you what I think. Okay, those of you that haven't been on the channel long, one thing I did years ago is I cut a chainsaw in half. This is a Stihl 028 Super. Cut this one in half because it has a factory pop-up piston, windows, and it was a great learning tool. I made a lot of videos on this. If you go into my playlist, there's a chainsaw cutaway series. If you want to know how a 2-stroke works, literally hundreds of thousands of people have watched that, and a lot of them have got something out of it. I get comments and questions and emails about that all the time. So if you're curious how 2-stroke works, check out right here, I'll put it, the 2-stroke cutaway series. Okay, so what Benjamin's saying is, and I do this all the time, friends. Most of the saws on my saw shelf have 1 ring. Okay, only put a ring here. Sorry, I grabbed the world's dirtiest knife. I was scraping out a bar with it. That's fine. Okay, you have one ring here, okay, in the top spot, and no ring here. Okay, and the question is, the first part of his question from the drawing that I'm actually looking at right here is, when the piston goes down, and again, I will reiterate how these things work, okay? We'll start at bottom dead center. This is what we call bottom dead center. You can see the crank journals are at the top. The piston does not move for a couple of degrees. The spot in the middle of those couple of degrees is called bottom dead center. Okay? As the piston goes up, right here, from bottom dead center to the spot where the intake opens, right here, creates suction. Okay? So you're creating suction like a syringe. Think of this motor as a syringe because that's all it is. Your syringe is going up and creating suction. When the piston gets past the intake port right there, okay, right here, that suction pulls fuel, air, and oil through the carburetor into the bottom end. That fuel, air, and oil fills the transfers and anything below the piston, okay, on the way up. Now, at some point, you lose your vacuum, and there's a bunch of fuel, air, and oil floating around in here. On the way down, okay, once this piston starts going down, it starts to decrease the size of the bottle. I call the bottom end a bottle because that's how my brain works. Now, the minute that this intake closes, the piston really creates pressure, okay? Okay, and the piston volume displaces a certain amount of volume in the bottom end. That's why your crank seals can't leak. If they leak out, when you're pushing this down, it'll push some of it through here and you end up with a leak, okay? And I've done videos on all this. That's how these things work. Now, as this is going down, at some point, right there, your upper transfer opens, okay? When your upper transfer opens, that little bit of pressure you're building, 7, 10 pounds, whatever it is, comes out of here, hits the back side over top of the intake, both sides swirl, and then some of it comes out the exhaust port, and then on the way up, okay, once the exhaust port is sealed, whatever is remaining in here gets squished. Certain amount of degrees before top dead center, the spark plug fires, it goes boom, and then it comes down, and the whole thing starts over again. Okay, that's how two-stroke works. Benjamin's question. Okay, when I don't have a bottom ring in, am I pushing air, fuel, air, and oil around here, right? Because once that clears there, you will get some leakage, right? You have to. You got 10 to 7 pounds going through here. And look, that creates a clear path to the exhaust port, right? Now, the question is, do you get some leakage? And is that a negative? Is that a net negative? Is it not a positive versus the one ring? Okay, so the main thing is here, all transfers that I've ever seen are pushing backwards. So you have two transfers pushing backwards. When this piston's going down, we'll say this is the side that we can't see right now. The fuel and air starts going through here, and it will fill this little space. It has to, right? This will be under some negative pressure, and underneath here is under positive pressure. Okay? Remember, guys, I'm an air movement guy. Air quality is my game, so positive and negative pressures is what I work with every day. You get a little bit of fuel and air into there, okay? And some of it could bleed to here. Do I think much gets out? I really don't, because it's traveling this way, and that little bit from this side is going to hit that way, and at some point, those two jets of fuel and air should collide, and then they got to come back. Well, I bet you by that point, we're already open. This stuff is happening in a 10,000th of a second, okay? Do the math. If this saw is running at 12,500 RPM, do the math on how many times a second it's going up and down. Now, could I lose a little bit out of the exhaust port? Sure. Do I think it matters? No, not at all. Every saw almost on my shelf has a single ring piston and no problems with being lean. The second question is, you have a ring here, okay? If you have two rings, you're sealing with both rings, okay? On the way down, you're sealing with both rings, and on the way up, you're squeezing with both rings. If you take one out, do you lose a little bit of compression on the way up? Yes. How much? Not much at all, friends. And please, try this stuff at home. Use a good quality compression tester with the short lead on it, and test this for yourself. The only thing I will say is test it. You would have to break in the saw with two rings, pull the top end off and take the bottom ring out, and then really get a good measurement. Do you lose a little bit? Yes. Is it a lot? No. And the thing is, it goes saw by saw. Some saws you really don't lose anything, some you lose a little bit more. Again, is that a negative? Yes. On its own, if you just look at single ring pistons from what you're losing, it's a negative. But remember, you're gaining so much by doing that. Now, do you lose case compression? I don't really think you do, because what's really causing the case compression is it's sealed here, the top ring, right? It's sealing on the top ring and it's going down. Now, what's really causing that case compression is from here, okay, to there. Remember that. You're only really compressing when there's a port open below the piston, okay? You're not doing anything. You're not compressing. You compress from here to here, okay, until that actually leaks. So then the other thing I thought of, what would be the net benefit, or the total benefit of... I've been doing paperwork this week, friends, and I'm saying the word net a lot. I don't know why, but that's what we're going to go with here. What would also happen if you didn't have a ring in there? What would be the benefit? Well, what's in that fuel that's traveling into there and air? Oil. So remember something, when you don't have a bottom ring, that groove is going to be full of oil. And then, as that goes up and down, guess what you're doing? You're putting all that oil into the cylinder, which is a total benefit to the saw, especially a ported saw. So then the next question is, what is the other benefit? Well, friction, okay, parasitic drag, whatever you want to call it, okay? The less friction you have going up and down, the less drag you have. You should end up with a quicker revving saw. You should end up with a cooler running saw. This is old school race car stuff. I didn't come up with it. So that's why you want to run a single ring piston. Also, this is air cooled. The cooler you can keep this saw, the better it's going to run. This thing is meant to run at a certain head temperature to make it efficient. The hotter it runs, the less efficient it is. The less efficient it is, the less power you make. You could port the living snot out of a saw. But here's the thing. The hotter the saw runs, whether it be with compression and timing, whatever you want to do to make the saw make more power, the more heat you make, especially with RPM, as you increase the RPM, you're going to get hotter. The more heat you make, you're going to lose power as this cylinder, as you are exceeding the capabilities of these fins to cool. Okay? Remember that. So, if you can keep your cylinder cooler with more oil, and again, friends, you could drill holes in your pistons to put oil where you think you need it. You can use a single ring. If you keep your cylinder cooler, the benefit outweighs anything else. And you got all this oil in this ring here. Okay? Now, the biggest negative, to two rings, and I've talked to a lot of builders, you can see it on this piston. Why is this piston so dark in between the rings? Because there's no oil in between them. Okay? You don't get a lot of oil in between a two-ring piston. I've talked to so many builders about this, and That's why it's dark there, because that's from heat, friends. Okay, that creates a lot of heat, which is not good for an air cooled motor. So it's my opinion, and I love this kind of stuff. Benjamin was like, "Hey, I don't know if this is a thing. Is this a thing?" I have no way of measuring that, Benjamin, but I've run single rings in many, many, many saws, and one thing I noticed is they run cooler. My home lights are single ring. Most of the builds on this channel, they run cooler with a single ring. And the reason is oil on both sides of the ring. There's no hot spot, which you can plainly see on this piston. Look at 2-ring pistons you removed. That's hot, that's a hot spot. That discoloration is burnt on oil. Okay, you can see how hot this thing's gotten. So that's where I'm at with this. I hope you guys followed along, but I see no negatives to running a single ring. The little bit of loss in compression doesn't seem to affect any saw that I've built with it. The heat reduction seems to be better. The weight savings on the piston, because remember, that ring has weight to it. Every gram you take off a piston will add to the performance of the saw. So I think it's all good. But Benjamin, that was something that never occurred to me, and you were 100% right, buddy. 100%. Perhaps you do lose a little bit out here. But remember, when I port a cylinder, this is why I tell people not to hog out transfers without timing it. Notice the floor of this intake port is lower than the floor of this intake port. And the reason for that is it opens sooner. Okay? And it opens sooner, which allows more fuel, air, and oil into the bottom end. So we're limiting how much suction we create. Okay? We're limiting it when we port a saw. If that makes sense. I drew a line here years ago to kind of show. Say we ported it and it opens here now. And it only sucks, you know, from here to there instead of from here to here. You're creating less vacuum versus more when you port. Okay, so, and that's why I'm an advocate of not over intaking a saw, because if you over intake it, your saw might get lazy. It might not be as snappy. The snappiness is really created by the weight of your components, the shape and texture you put on your intake, and also how much vacuum you're creating. Okay, so, and again, these transfers are substantially larger. These ones are substantially larger than those ones. Okay? Substantially. To the point where you'd think if you're creating that much more case volume, this saw shouldn't even run, right? It should be lean, but it's not. When I do that to a saw, they're not lean. In fact, often my jets are the same as stock or turned in more than stock, meaning I'm allowing less fuel and air into the saw. So, again, I love this stuff. Benjamin, thank you for drawing that. It was something I never thought about. But, again, fuel, air, and oil is hitting here. If you lose a little out the exhaust, I honestly don't think it matters. Technically, if that was in here, on the way down, right, you create some vacuum, because these do scavenge, you'd probably pull that little bit back in. But just my thoughts on it. Maybe I'm wrong. I like single ring pistons, and I'm going to keep using them because you feel it here. And they seem to run cooler and just run better. So, anyhow, that's my thoughts. Well, I try not to be too long-winded there, but that's the ins and outs of the single ring piston. A little bit easier to see with a cutaway. If you're learning how a two-stroke works, if you have an old saw that's junky, cut it in half and put it one side back together. Put your piston in here. Cut your cylinder at like 60%. You know, find the center of the exhaust port and cut it past there so that your piston still stays in the bore. And look at it. Twirl that thing around for an afternoon. And after a while, you'll be like, wow, it's so simple. It really is that simple That's how it works. And again, if you did find your saw was a little lean, well, you could open the jet a little bit more. If you were losing a bunch through the exhaust port, or you weren't getting enough case compression or enough vacuum, well, you could really just open the jet more. If that didn't work, well, you could put a smaller carburetor on to increase the vacuum at the intake port. You could also drill your jets. You could also raise your metering lever up higher. And there's infinite ways that you can make these things run better. And that's why the old timers that build saws often are the best builders, because they know the mechanical tricks, and they have the mechanical background to diagnose fueling issues or ignition issues on top of the porting. Because again, when you port these things, you're changing what the saw is capable of. And that's why, friends, I never tune by RPM. I let the saw tell me when it's 4-stroking. That way, I've never cooked the saw. And I haven't cooked the saw because the saw will tell me when it's too lean by the sound of the 4-stroke at the exhaust, And that way, and then after, if I want to put a tack on it and see where it's running, it's fine. But I never tune a saw with a tack. Oh, it's supposed to run at XYZ RPM. I don't ever do that, because you could have a saw that runs at XYZ RPM and still be too lean, and then you pop the saw. So anyhow, friends, remember, heat is the enemy on these. Heat is what blows up saws. Heat is what fries bottom end bearings. Heat is what welds rings to the cylinder bore. Heat is what scores, okay? Keep the heat out of the saws. The more fuel, air, and oil you can get to the top end, the better your saw will run, and the longer it will run, and the lower the head temps will run. Put a temp gauge. Temp gauge your saws. I've been doing it for years. Do a muffler mod and see how much cooler your saw runs. Once you port it, see if it runs cooler or hotter. Drill holes in the pistons. Run a single ring. Fit your piston to the bore. All these little things will help, and you'll notice a lower head temp on a hot day, and you'll notice that your saw seems to make more power. At least that's what I've noticed. Anyhow, Benjamin, thanks for saying that. I hope that wasn't too long-winded, getting back to the roots. I used to be the guy. I was known for doing that kind of stuff. That kind of content, and I still love doing it. Anyhow, thanks for watching. Take her easy. Check out my playlists on my homepage. I have tons of them on this kind of stuff, specific saws, brands, tips and tricks, filing, you name it, it's on there. I even got some truck stuff on there. So anyhow, thanks for watching. Take her easy. Later.